Millionaire's evil plan to frame poor dad backfires when police dog exposes the truth. Michael Thompson worked 3 jobs just to afford his daughter's asthma medication. He was exhausted, broke, but devoted to 8-year-old Emma, the only family he had left. Then one morning, police burst through their apartment door with handcuffs and accusations that would destroy everything. $50,000 had been stolen from his workplace, and all the evidence pointed to the desperate single father. As Michael faced a decade in prison, Emma made a promise that seemed impossible for a little girl to keep. "I'm going to save you, Daddy." What happened next involved a conspiracy worth millions, a German shepherd who could smell lies, and the most dramatic courtroom reversal in legal history. This is their incredible true story of love, courage, and the unlikely heroes who proved that truth really can triumph over corruption. The pre-dawn silence of Maple Street shattered like glass at exactly 6:03 a.m. Emma Thompson's 8-year-old eyes snapped open to the violent symphony of sirens wailing, car doors slamming, and heavy boots thundering up the narrow staircase of their rundown apartment building. Red and blue lights strobed through their thin curtains, casting eerie shadows that danced across the peeling wallpaper like demons in the darkness. "Daddy?" Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible above the chaos erupting outside their door. She clutched her worn teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, against her chest as the sounds grew louder, more threatening. The flashing lights made her tiny bedroom feel like the inside of a kaleidoscope gone mad. In the next room, Michael Thompson jolted awake on the sagging couch that served as his bed, his body still aching from yesterday's double shift at the warehouse and construction site. For a moment, confusion clouded his tired mind. Then came the thunderous pounding on their apartment door, not a knock, but the aggressive hammering of authority demanding entry. "Police! Open up!" Michael's blood turned to ice. His first thought wasn't of himself, but of Emma. Whatever this was about, she didn't need to see it. He stumbled toward her room, his work-worn hands shaking as he reached for her door handle. Too late. The apartment door exploded inward, with a splintering crash that sent their security chain flying across the room. 6 police officers in tactical gear flooded through the doorway, their weapons drawn, shouting commands that overlapped into an incomprehensible roar of authority and aggression. "Get down! Get down now! Hands where we can see them! Daddy!" Emma's scream pierced through the chaos as she ran from her bedroom, her bare feet slapping against the cold linoleum floor. She threw herself against her father's legs, wrapping her thin arms around him like a shield made of pure love and terror. Michael's world tilted on, gathering in the hallway like vultures drawn to roadkill. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2B clutched her bathrobe closed, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and shameful curiosity. Old Mr. Kim stood in his doorway, shaking his head with the satisfied expression of someone whose suspicions had been confirmed. The whispers started immediately, a Greek chorus of judgment that would follow them for months to come. I always knew something was off about that family. Single father working all those jobs, probably dealing drugs, that poor little girl. The cold steel of handcuffs bit into Michael's wrists, as the lead detective, a grim-faced man with graying temples, read him his rights in a monotone voice that sounded like a death sentence. Emma clung to his leg, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 8-year-old soul could contain. "Please," Michael's voice cracked as he looked down at his daughter. "Can someone just tell me what this is about? My daughter." "Michael Thompson, you're under arrest for grand theft in the 1st degree," the detective announced, his voice carrying easily to every curious neighbor packed into the hallway. "You have the right to remain silent." The contrast was devastating. Here was their humble home, a cramped two-bedroom apartment with second-hand furniture held together by hope and duct tape, walls yellowed by age and the previous tenant's smoking habit, linoleum curling at the edges, and a kitchen table covered in unpaid medical bills. Yet the charges being read suggested crimes of sophisticated greed, of calculated betrayal, of a man who had thrown away trust and honor for money. As they led Michael away, Emma's cries echoed through the building like the wail of a wounded animal. "Daddy! Daddy, come back!" Her voice cracked with the kind of desperation that should never have to leave a child's throat. The neighbors watched, some with pity, others with the cruel satisfaction of witnessing someone else's fall from grace. Not that the Thompsons had ever been anywhere but the bottom to begin with. Mrs. Rodriguez finally stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her shock. "Misha," she whispered, reaching for Emma's trembling shoulders. "Come here, sweetheart." But Emma couldn't hear anything beyond her own heartbreak and the sound of her father's footsteps disappearing down the stairs. In that moment, her world didn't just change, it disintegrated entirely, leaving an 8-year-old girl standing in the wreckage of everything she had believed to be safe and true. The interrogation room at the county police station felt like the slow dissolution of human dignity. Michael sat hunched forward, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The Orange County Jail jumpsuit hung loose on his lean frame. A man who had never eaten enough because every dollar went to his daughter's needs. The handcuffs had left red marks on his wrists, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish crushing his chest like a vice. Detective Raymond Torres slid a thick manila folder across the metal table with the practiced ease of a man who had delivered life-destroying news thousands of times before. His weathered face showed no emotion as he opened the file, revealing photographs, financial documents, and security footage stills that painted a picture of guilt so complete it seemed airtight. "Michael Thompson," Torres began, his voice echoing off the bare walls. "You're being charged with grand theft in the first degree. $50,000 stolen from Whitmore Industries company's safe. The evidence is overwhelming." "50,000?" Michael's voice cracked like a teenager's. The number was so impossibly large, it might as well have been 50 million. "Detective, I've never seen $50,000 in my entire life. I clean offices, I load trucks, I pour concrete. I don't steal." Torres slid a security photograph across the table. The black and white image showed a figure near Whitmore Industries office building at 11:47 p.m. on the night in question. The person's face was partially obscured, but the clothing and build matched Michael's exactly. "That's not me," Michael whispered, but even as the words left his lips, he could see how futile they sounded. The figure in the photograph could have been him. The timestamp showed he would have been cleaning the building at that exact time. "Your financial records show mounting debts," Torres continued, producing bank statements that chronicled Michael's struggle with ruthless precision. "Emma's medical bills, overdue rent, credit cards maxed out. You were desperate." Each piece of evidence hit Michael like a physical blow. Yes, Emma's asthma medication was expensive. Yes, The emergency room visits had buried them in debt. Yes, he had been 3 months behind on rent, but desperation had driven him to work harder, not to become a criminal. "I need to call my sister," Michael said suddenly, his mind snapping to the only thing that mattered. "Emma, she needs someone to pick her up from school. She can't come home to an empty apartment." Torres nodded toward the phone mounted on the wall. "You get 1 call." Michael's hands shook as he dialed Sarah's number. His sister answered. A line stretched for an eternity before Sarah's voice returned, smaller and shocked. "Mike, what are you talking about? You wouldn't steal a candy bar, let alone—" "I know, but they have evidence, and I don't understand any of it." "Please, Sarah, Emma can't know I'm in jail. Just tell her I had to go away for work or something. Please." As Michael hung up the phone, the full weight of his situation crashed down like an avalanche. 10 years in prison. Emma would be 18 when he got out, if he got out. She would grow up believing her father was a thief, a man who had abandoned her for money. The little girl, who still drew pictures of them living in a castle someday, would spend her childhood visiting him through prison glass. Torres gathered the evidence back into the folder with mechanical efficiency. "Your arraignment is tomorrow morning. I suggest you think carefully about your options, Thompson. The prosecution is pushing for the maximum sentence. 10 years is a long time to be away from your daughter." Left alone in the interrogation room, Michael stared at his reflection in the one-way mirror. The man looking back at him appeared guilty, tired, desperate, defeated. He understood now how easy it would be for a jury to believe he had thrown away his integrity for $50,000. In their eyes, he was exactly the type of person who would steal. Poor, uneducated, and desperate enough to do anything for money. But as tears finally began to flow down his cheeks, Michael made a silent promise to the little girl who was probably wondering why Daddy hadn't come home. Somehow, some way, he would prove his innocence. Emma deserved a father she could be proud of, and you would move heaven and earth to make sure she got one. Harrison Whitmore's corner office occupied the entire 42nd floor of the gleaming downtown skyscraper that bore his name in golden letters 20 feet tall. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below, where tiny people scurried about their insignificant lives like ants in a carefully organized colony. The office itself was a monument to wealth and power. Rich mahogany paneling imported from South America, leather furniture that cost more than most people's annual salary, and oil paintings by masters whose names commanded respect in auction houses around the world. At 63, Whitmore cut an impressive figure. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his custom-tailored suit fit like it had been sewn directly onto his frame, and his piercing blue eyes held the cold intelligence of a man who had spent decades manipulating of manufactured outrage. Trusted janitor betrays employer's faith, and desperate father steals $50,000 from company safe. And his personal favorite, poverty drives man to devastating betrayal. Whitmore pressed a button on his desk, and his executive assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The press conference is ready, Mr. Whitmore. Channel 7, Channel 12, and the Tribune are all here, along with several digital outlets." "Excellent, Margaret. Give me 5 minutes, then send them in." Whitmore walked to his private bathroom, larger than Michael Thompson's entire living room. and checked his appearance in the gold-framed mirror. He practiced his expression, wounded but dignified, disappointed but not bitter, the very picture of a successful businessman who had extended trust to the wrong person and paid the price for his generosity. The media representatives filed into his office like well-trained pets responding to their master's call. Cameras rolled, reporters held up digital recorders, and the familiar ballet of manufactured news began. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore began, his voice carrying the perfect mixture of sadness and resolve. "I called this press conference because I believe the public deserves to understand the full scope of what happened here. For 3 years, I trusted Michael Thompson with access to our facilities. He cleaned our offices, had access to sensitive areas, and I personally vouched for his character when our security team expressed concerns about background checks for cleaning staff." A reporter from Channel 7 raised her hand. "Mr. Whitmore, how did you discover the theft?" Whitmore's jaw tightened with calculated emotion. "Our monthly audit revealed discrepancies in our accounts. When we checked the security footage and conducted a thorough investigation, the evidence was overwhelming. Michael Thompson, a man I had personally defended as hardworking and trustworthy, had betrayed that trust in the most devastating way possible." "What was your reaction when you learned the truth?" asked the Tribune reporter. "Heartbroken," Whitmore replied without hesitation. "You have to understand, I've built my career on reading people, on extending opportunities to those who deserve them. When I see a single father working multiple jobs to support his child, my instinct is to help, not to suspect. Perhaps that was my mistake. Trusting too freely, believing too readily in the basic goodness of people." The cameras captured every nuance of his performance. The slight tremor in his voice when he spoke of trust betrayed, the way his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that spoke of a man struggling to maintain his composure, the distant look in his eyes that suggested deep personal pain. "The $50,000 isn't what hurts most," Whitmore continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It's the violation of trust. I pride myself on being a fair not. This betrayal makes me question everything I thought I knew about human nature." After the reporters left, their digital recorders full of sound bites that would dominate the evening news cycle, Whitmore's mask slipped away like a discarded costume. He poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old Macallan whiskey and returned it to his wall of monitors, watching with satisfaction as his carefully crafted narrative spread across the airwaves. The story was perfect in its simplicity. A wealthy businessman extends trust to a desperate poor man, only to have that trust thrown back in his face. The media ate it up because it confirmed every prejudice their audiences held about class, desperation, and the criminal tendencies of the poor. Michael Thompson wasn't just guilty in the eyes of the law, he was guilty in the court of public opinion, and that verdict would be much harder to overturn. At exactly 6 p.m., Whitmore's security chief, Vincent Rodriguez, entered the office through a private door that connected to a service elevator. Rodriguez was a compact man with nervous eyes and calloused hands, the kind of person who understood that survival sometimes required flexible morals. "The evidence is solid," Rodriguez reported, his slight accent betraying his anxiety about the conversation. "The security footage has been properly adjusted, the financial records are in place, and the planted evidence in Thompson's locker was discovered right on schedule." Whitmore nodded approvingly. "And Thompson's public defender?" "Overworked, inexperienced, and completely outgunned. The prosecution will steamroll right over him." "Excellent." Whitmore raised his glass in a mock toast. "To justice for the deserving, Vincent. Sometimes the system needs a little help to reach the right conclusion." As Rodriguez left through the same private entrance, Whitmore turned back to his monitors. The evening news was leading with his press conference, and the narrative was already solidifying in the public consciousness. Michael Thompson, thief, betrayer, the ungrateful poor man who had bitten the hand that fed him. But the real beauty of his plan wasn't just in framing Thompson. It was in how perfectly it would deflect attention from his own crimes. While investigators focused on the janitor's supposed theft of $50,000, they would never think to look for the millions Whitmore had been systematically stealing from his own company for years. Sometimes, Whitmore reflected as he sipped his whiskey, the best place to hide was in plain sight, behind a wall of righteous indignation and wounded trust. Michael Thompson would go to prison. Emma Thompson would grow up believing her father was a criminal, and Harrison Whitmore would continue his life of luxury, protected by the very prejudices that made his frame-up possible. It was, he thought,
Thompson was already awake. He had learned long ago that his body didn't need an alarm. Desperation was a more reliable timekeeper than any mechanical device. In the dim glow of the streetlight, filtering through their thin curtains, he could see Emma's small form curled up in her bed across the room, her breathing slightly labored, even in sleep. The soft wheeze that accompanied each exhale was a constant reminder of how fragile his little girl's health truly was. Michael slipped out of bed with practiced silence, his joints protesting after only 3 hours of sleep. The apartment was cold. They kept the heat at 62 degrees to save money, and even that modest comfort was a luxury they could barely afford. He pulled on yesterday's work clothes, the fabric stiff with dried sweat and concrete dust that no amount of washing could completely remove. His reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man aging faster than his 32 years should allow. Hollow cheeks, deep circles under his eyes, and shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. By 4:15 a.m., Michael was behind the wheel of his 15-year-old Honda Civic, its engine coughing to life like an old man with emphysema. The drive to Riverside Warehouse took 20 minutes through empty streets that looked haunted in the pre-dawn darkness. Other early shift workers moved like ghosts through the industrial district, security guards ending their shifts, hospital staff heading to work, and people like Michael who had learned that survival required sacrificing sleep for dollars. The warehouse was a cathedral of commerce built from corrugated steel and fluorescent lighting. Loading docks stretched along the building's length like hungry mouths waiting to be fed, and the constant hum of conveyor belts provided a mechanical heartbeat that never stopped. Michael clocked in at 4:47 a.m. and immediately joined the line of workers preparing for the morning truck arrivals. For the next 4 hours, Michael's world consisted of cardboard boxes, shipping labels, and the relentless rhythm of loading and unloading. 50-pound boxes of electronics, cases of canned goods that seemed to weigh twice their listed weight, and furniture packages that required 2 men to lift safely, but management preferred 1 man working twice as fast. His back screamed in protest, his hands developed new calluses over old ones, and his lungs filled with dust that made him appreciate Emma's struggle to breathe. The warehouse supervisor, a thick-necked man named Patterson, who seemed to take personal offense at any display of fatigue, prowled the loading docks like a predator. "Thompson, move it! These trucks don't load themselves, and I got 3 more coming in before noon." Michael nodded and picked up his pace, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. Each box represented a fraction of Emma's next doctor visit that kept his daughter breathing. He couldn't afford to slow down, couldn't afford to complain, couldn't afford to be anything less than the perfect employee who never missed a day and never asked for favors.
At 9 a.m. sharp, Michael clocked out and ran to his car, wolfing down a gas station breakfast sandwich as he drove across town to the construction site. The transition from warehouse worker to construction laborer required a complete mental shift, from the organized chaos of shipping and receiving to the controlled demolition and creation of the construction world. The site foreman, a weathered man named Carlos, who had been pouring concrete since before Michael was born, assigned him to the mixing crew. For the next 6 hours, Michael would shovel gravel, operate the mixing truck, and pour concrete foundations that would outlast him by decades. The work was brutally physical. Concrete didn't wait for tired muscles or aching joints. Once the mixing process began, it had to be completed regardless of how many hours Michael had already worked or how many hours he still had ahead of him. The Arizona sun turned the construction site into an open-air furnace. Michael's clothes became soaked with sweat within the first hour, and the concrete dust clung to his skin like gray makeup that wouldn't wash off. His water bottle became his lifeline, refilled from a hose that tasted like rubber and chemicals, but provided the hydration that kept him functional. "Thompson, you're doing good work," Carlos called out during their brief lunch break. "You keep this up, I might have something more permanent for you." Michael nodded gratefully, but his mind was already racing ahead to his evening shift. More permanent work at the construction site would mean better pay, but it would also mean giving up his janitorial job at Whitmore Industries. The cleaning work paid less per hour, but it was steady, predictable, and Emma knew he would be home by midnight. The math was always the same. Stability versus opportunity. Security versus the chance for something better. At 3 p.m., Michael clocked out from construction and had exactly 47 minutes to drive home, shower, check on Emma, and grab dinner before his shift at Whitmore Industries began. The apartment felt like a sanctuary after 9 hours of physical labor, but the stack of medical bills on their kitchen table served as a stark reminder that sanctuary was temporary. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table, her inhaler within easy reach, and her breathing more labored than it had been that morning. "Hi, Daddy," she said without looking up from her math worksheet. "Mrs. Rodriguez made me soup for lunch." Michael's heart clenched. Their neighbor's kindness was both a blessing and a humiliation, a reminder that he couldn't even provide adequate meals for his daughter. "That was nice of her, sweetheart. How are—" worry her father. But Michael could see the slight blue tinge around her lips, the way she paused between words to catch her breath, the careful way she moved to avoid triggering another attack. The medical bills seemed to multiply like cancer cells. Dr. Martinez's office visits, prescription medications that cost more than their monthly grocery budget, emergency room co-pays that appeared on their credit card statements like accusations of inadequate parenting. Each piece of paper represented a choice between Emma's health and their basic survival, and Michael had learned that there was really no choice at all. By 4:30 p.m., Michael was back in his car, driving toward downtown and his third job of the day. The Whitmore Industries building rose 42 stories into the sky, its glass and steel facade reflecting the late afternoon sun like a beacon of prosperity that he would never be allowed to truly enter. He parked in the employee lot behind the building, next to other cars that had seen better decades, and prepared himself for another 4 hours of work that would bring him just a little bit closer to giving Emma the life she deserved. The attack came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night, pulling Michael from the shallow sleep that all his exhausted body could manage between shifts. Emma's gasping cough shattered the apartment's silence like breaking glass. followed by the terrifying whistle of air trying to force its way through constricted airways. Michael's eyes snapped open, his father's instincts immediately flooding his system with adrenaline that burned away fatigue and replaced it with focused panic. "Emma!" He was at her bedside before he was fully conscious, his hands already reaching for the rescue inhaler on her nightstand. The small plastic device wasn't there. His heart hammered against his ribs as he frantically searched the cluttered surface, a water glass, her worn copy of Charlotte's Web, the small flashlight she used to read under the covers when she thought he was asleep. But no inhaler. Emma sat up in bed, her small hands clutched around her throat, her eyes wide with the primal terror of suffocation. Each breath was a battle she was losing, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow movements that weren't bringing enough oxygen to her lungs. The familiar wheeze had escalated to a high-pitched whistle that sounded like air escaping from a punctured tire. "Daddy," she managed to whisper between gasps, the single word taking enormous effort to produce. Michael's panic sharpened into desperate efficiency. He tore through Emma's backpack, dumped out her toy box, checked the kitchen counter where she sometimes left her inhaler after her evening breathing treatment. Each second felt like an hour as Emma's breathing became more labored, her lips beginning to take on the bluish tinge that had haunted Michael's nightmares since her first severe attack 3 years ago. "Where is it?" Calm, despite the terror clawing at his chest. Emma needed him to be strong, needed him to fix this, like he had fixed every other crisis in their small world. Emma pointed weakly toward the living room, and Michael found the rescue inhaler wedged between the couch cushions where it had fallen during her afternoon homework session. His hands shook as he shook the device and removed the cap, muscle memory guiding him through the routine they had practiced dozens of times with Dr. Martinez. "Okay, sweetheart, you know what to do. Breathe out first, then breathe in, slow and deep when I press this." Michael positioned the inhaler between Emma's lips, his free hand gently rubbing her back in slow circles that he hoped would help her stay calm. 1, 2, 3. The medication hissed into Emma's lungs, and Michael counted to 10 before allowing her to breathe normally again. They repeated the process 2 more times, Emma's breathing gradually becoming less frantic, the terrible whistling sound fading to the more familiar wheeze that meant the attack was subsiding. But even as Emma's immediate crisis passed, Michael could see that something was different this time. Her recovery was slower, her breathing remaining labored even after the rescue medication should have provided relief. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of a system under constant stress. "Daddy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her small hand finding his in the darkness. "I know, baby, I know. But you're okay now. The medicine is working." Michael's voice was steady, but inside, his mind was racing through calculations he had made too many times before. Emergency room visit, minimum $500, probably closer to $800 once they ran tests. Lost wages from missing his morning warehouse shift, $87. The prescription refill she would need, $200, that they didn't have. By 3 a.m. it was clear that this wasn't an attack Emma could weather at home. Her breathing had stabilized, but remained shallow and effortful, and she couldn't lie down without the wheezing returning with frightening intensity. Michael bundled her in blankets and carried her to the car, her small body feeling impossibly fragile in his arms. The emergency room at County General was a fluorescent-lit purgatory that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. The waiting room was populated by the city's forgotten, homeless individuals seeking warmth, elderly patients whose children were too busy to visit, and working parents like Michael, who couldn't afford regular health care, but couldn't afford to lose understaffed hospital. She listened to Emma's lungs with practiced efficiency, her frown deepening with each assessment. "Mr. Thompson, Emma's asthma is getting worse," Dr. Hendricks said, her voice gentle but direct. "Her lung function is significantly decreased from her last visit 6 months ago. We need to discuss some changes to her treatment plan." Michael's heart sank. Changes to the treatment plan meant expensive medications, potentially hospitalization, specialist referrals they couldn't afford. What kind of changes? "She needs a controller medication, something she takes daily to prevent attacks, not just the rescue inhaler for emergencies. And I want to refer her to a pulmonologist. Her symptoms are becoming more frequent and more severe." The words hit Michael like physical blows. Daily medication meant a monthly expense of at least $300. A specialist meant appointments he couldn't afford, tests that would drain their savings, treatments that would require him to choose between Emma's health and their basic survival. "Doctor, I have to ask, how much are we talking about? The medication, the specialist visits?" Michael's voice was barely above a whisper, shame burning in his chest at having to reduce his daughter's health to dollars and cents. Dr. Hendricks's expression softened with understanding. She had clearly had this conversation before, with other parents caught between love and poverty. "The medication will be expensive, but there are assistance programs. Let me give you some information about reduced-cost clinics and prescription help programs." As they waited for Emma's discharge papers, Michael watched his daughter sleep in the hospital bed, her small chest rising and falling with the mechanical assistance of a nebulizer treatment. The steady hiss of the medication being converted to mist was both comforting and terrifying, proof that his little girl needed help he couldn't provide, care he couldn't afford, a future he couldn't guarantee. At 7 a.m., as the sun painted the hospital corridors with golden light that seemed to mock his exhaustion, Michael carried Emma back to their car. She had missed another day of school, he had missed another day of work, and the stack of medical bills on their kitchen table had grown by another insurmountable amount. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep and Michael had called in sick to his warehouse job to stay home and monitor her breathing, he sat at their kitchen table and did math that never balanced. Rent, utilities, food, medication, medical bills. The numbers swirled in his head like accusatory voices, each one representing a way he was failing his daughter. In the darkness of their small apartment, surrounded by the evidence of their poverty and his inadequacy, Michael Thompson put his head in his hands and wept silent tears to give Emma the life and health she deserved. It was a dangerous thought for a desperate man to have, and somewhere across the city Harrison Whitmore was counting on exactly that kind of desperation to make his plan work perfectly. Harrison Whitmore's evening routine rarely brought him to the office after 8 p.m., but tonight was different. Tonight he had a very specific purpose that required privacy, shadows, and the kind of careful observation that could only be conducted when the building's corridors were empty of witnesses and security cameras captured nothing but routine cleaning activities. He emerged from his private elevator onto the 38th floor at exactly 10:47 p.m., his Italian leather shoes making no sound on the polished marble floors. The executive level was tomb quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of emergency lighting and the occasional flicker of a computer monitor left running by some industrious middle manager hoping to impress superiors who would never notice their dedication. Whitmore moved through the familiar darkness with predatory grace, his destination clear in his mind. He had been watching Michael Thompson for 3 weeks now, studying the man's habits, character, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. What had begun as idle curiosity about the night cleaning crew had evolved into something much more calculated, the identification of the perfect instrument for his purposes. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Conference Room C, Whitmore could see Michael's slight figure moving methodically through the accounting department on the floor below. Even from this distance, Thompson's character was evident in every movement. He didn't simply run a vacuum cleaner across the carpet. He moved furniture to clean underneath, straightened papers that had been left askew, and took care to empty trash bins completely, rather than simply replacing the liners. The man was thorough, honest, and conscientious, qualities that made him both an excellent employee and a terrible choice for anyone actually contemplating theft. But those same qualities would make him an ideal scapegoat for someone else's crimes. Whitmore descended to the 37th floor, using the service stairwell, timing his movement to intersect with Thompson's predictable route through the building. He had memorized the cleaning schedule weeks ago, floors 35 through 40, between 10 p.m. and midnight, with Thompson always working alone on the upper floors, while his partner covered the lobby and lower levels. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." Michael's voice carried genuine surprise and a hint of nervousness as he encountered his employer in the darkened hallway. The janitor immediately moved to the side, his body language deferential and apologetic, as if his presence in the building he was paid to clean was somehow an intrusion. "Evening, Thompson." Whitmore's voice was carefully modulated, friendly but not familiar, acknowledging but not warm. "Working hard, I see." "Yes, sir, just finishing up the accounting department. I hope I'm not disturbing anything. I didn't know anyone was still in the building." Michael's honesty was almost painful to witness. Another man might have wondered why the company's CEO was wandering empty floors at nearly 11 p.m. Might have been curious about the unusual encounter. Might have asked questions that could become problematic later. But Thompson simply accepted Whitmore's presence with the unquestioning deference of a man who had learned his place in the world's hierarchy. "Not at all. I often work late." "Tell me, Thompson, you've been with us for, 3 years now?" 3 years next month, sir." Pride crept into Michael's voice, the satisfaction of a man who had maintained steady employment in an uncertain world. "I've never missed a shift, never had any complaints from the supervisors." Whitmore nodded approvingly, filing away this information for future use. Perfect attendance. No disciplinary issues. 3 years of reliable service. All details that would make Thompson's supposed betrayal more shocking, and therefore more believable to a jury. "You have a daughter, don't you? I remember from your employment application." Michael's entire demeanor changed at the mention of Emma. His shoulders relaxed slightly, his expression softened, and his voice took on the warm tone of a man discussing his greatest treasure. "Yes, sir. Emma. She's 8, smart as a whip, loves to read." "Must be expensive, raising a child on your own." The question was casual, conversational, but Whitmore watched Michael's reaction with the intensity of a scientist studying a laboratory specimen.
He saw the brief tightening around the man's eyes, the slight shift in posture that spoke of financial pressure and constant worry. "We manage, sir. I work hard and Emma's a good kid. We don't need much." The lie was delivered with dignity, but it was still a lie. Whitmore had already conducted his research into Thompson's financial situation. The medical bills, the overdue notices, the credit cards pushed to their limits. The man was drowning in debt, working 3 jobs just to stay afloat, and still falling behind every month. "Perfect. Well, I should let you get back to work," Whitmore said, already turning away. "Have a good evening, Thompson." "You too, Mr. Whitmore." Daughter, acquired through carefully placed bribes in the healthcare system.
The portrait that emerged was of a man pushed to his absolute limit, a devoted father watching his child suffer while being powerless to provide the care she needed. In anyone else, such desperation might breed criminal intent.
But Thompson was different. His 3 years of employment showed a man who responded to pressure by working harder, not by compromising his ethics. When faced with mounting bills, he had taken a second job, then a third. When Emma's medical needs increased, he had sold his few possessions and moved to a cheaper apartment. At every crisis point, Thompson had chosen sacrifice over shortcuts,
which made him absolutely perfect for Whitmore's purposes. The beauty of the plan was in its psychological sophistication. No one would believe that a man like Thompson had suddenly decided to steal $50,000 on a whim. But everyone would believe that a desperate father, watching his daughter suffer from a medical condition he couldn't afford to treat properly, might have finally reached his breaking point. The narrative practically wrote itself. Good man pushed too far by circumstances beyond his control, making one terrible decision that would haunt him forever.
Whitmore opened his laptop and began typing, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he outlined the framework of Thompson's destruction. Security footage would need to be edited to show Thompson in places he had never been. Financial records would be created to suggest gambling debts and mounting desperation. Evidence would be planted in Thompson's locker at the warehouse, tying him to the theft in ways that would seem conclusive to investigators who weren't looking too closely. But the real genius of the plan lay in its exploitation of class prejudice and social assumptions. Michael Thompson was poor, uneducated, and desperate, exactly the kind of person the justice system expected to be guilty. His protests of innocence would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a man caught red-handed. His exemplary work record would be reframed as the careful cultivation of trust by someone planning a long-term theft. As Whitmore worked through the details of framing an innocent man, he felt no guilt, no hesitation, no moral qualms whatsoever. Thompson was a tool, nothing more. A convenient instrument to be used and discarded in service of a larger purpose. The man's life, his relationship with his daughter, his freedom and reputation, all of it was acceptable collateral damage in Whitmore's war for survival. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled with 10 million lights, each one representing lives and dreams and struggles that meant nothing to the man planning their systematic destruction. Harrison Whitmore was a predator in an expensive suit, and he had just identified the perfect prey. The digital editing suite hidden behind a false wall in Harrison Whitmore's guard private office represented the cutting edge of surveillance manipulation technology. 3 high-resolution monitors glowed in the darkness, casting an ethereal blue light across Whitmore's face, as his fingers danced across a keyboard with the practiced precision of a concert pianist performing a deadly symphony. The room itself was soundproofed and electromagnetically shielded, a digital fortress where truth could be murdered without leaving fingerprints. Whitmore had spent 2 weeks studying the building's security system, memorizing camera angles, timing sequences, and the predictable patterns of the night shift personnel. The Whitmore Industries building was monitored by 47 cameras, each one recording in high definition,
with timestamps that prosecutors would later claim were unalterable proof of guilt. What they wouldn't know was that their unalterable evidence had been crafted with the same attention to detail that Michelangelo had devoted to the Sistine Chapel. The original footage showed Michael Thompson following his normal cleaning routine, methodical, thorough, and completely innocent. Whitmore opened the file containing Thompson's genuine activities from the night of March 15th, entering the building at 10:17 p.m., cleaning the lower floors until 11:30, taking his mandated break in the employee lounge, then moving to the upper floors, where he worked until his shift ended at 2 a.m. Now, let's create a more interesting narrative, Whitmore murmured to himself, opening the advanced video editing software that had cost him more than Thompson earned in 3 years. The first alteration was subtle, a gap in Thompson's movements between 11:47 p.m. and 12:23 a.m. A 36-minute window when the cameras would show him nowhere near his assigned cleaning areas. Whitmore carefully extracted Thompson's image from footage taken 2 weeks earlier, when the janitor had been called to clean up a coffee spill near the executive elevators. With surgical precision, he inserted this older footage into the March 15th timeline, adjusting lighting and shadows to match the conditions that night. The timestamp manipulation required a deeper level of technical expertise. Whitmore bypassed the system's internal chronometer, manually adjusting the embedded metadata that prosecutors and forensic analysts would rely on to establish the sequence of events. To anyone examining the footage later, it would appear that Michael Thompson had indeed been near the executive offices during the exact time frame when the theft allegedly occurred. But video evidence alone wouldn't be sufficient. Whitmore needed a human witness, someone whose testimony would corroborate the fabricated timeline and add credibility to the prosecution's case. He had identified the perfect candidate weeks earlier, Vincent Rodriguez, the night security guard. Rodriguez arrived at Whitmore's office at exactly 1 a.m., using the service elevator and private entrance that allowed him to enter without being recorded by the building's main security systems. The guard was a small, nervous man in his 50s who had been working night shifts for 3 years while his immigration attorney navigated the labyrinthine process of obtaining legal residency. "Mr. Whitmore," Rodriguez said, his accent thick with anxiety, "you said this was about a security matter?" Whitmore gestured to a leather chair positioned directly across from his desk, the seating arrangement carefully choreographed to emphasize the power dynamic between them. "Please, sit down, Vincent. We need to discuss your future with this company." The words hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Rodriguez settled into the chair, his weathered hands gripping the armrests as he waited for whatever bomb Whitmore was about to detonate in his carefully constructed life. "I've been reviewing your employment file," Whitmore continued, opening a manila folder with theatrical precision. "Outstanding performance reviews, perfect attendance, no disciplinary issues. You've been a model employee, Vincent." "Thank you, sir. I try to do good work." "Yes, you do. Which is why I'm disappointed to discover that your immigration status is complicated." Whitmore pulled out a photocopy of Rodriguez's employment application, the forged social security number highlighted in yellow marker. "This presents a problem for both of us." Rodriguez's face went pale, the blood draining from his cheeks as his worst nightmare materialized in the form of bureaucratic paperwork and legal jeopardy. "Mr. Whitmore, I can explain." "No explanations necessary," Whitmore interrupted, his voice carrying the cold authority of a man accustomed to controlling other people's lives. "I'm not interested in destroying your life, Vincent. In fact, I'm prepared to help you. My legal team can expedite your residency application. Ensure that you and your family achieve the American dream you've been working toward." Hope flickered in Rodriguez's eyes, quickly followed by suspicion. Men like Whitmore didn't offer assistance without expecting something substantial in return. "What do you need me to do?" Whitmore smiled, recognizing the moment when resistance transformed into cooperation. "Very simple. On the night of March 15th, you observed Michael Thompson acting suspiciously near the executive floors. You saw him accessing areas outside his normal cleaning route, behaving in a manner that suggested he was engaged in unauthorized activity." "But, Mr. Whitmore, I don't remember. Memory can be unreliable," Whitmore said, sliding a typed statement across the desk. "Fortunately, I've prepared this witness statement that accurately reflects what you observed that night. Your signature that would destroy an innocent man's life." The statement was a masterpiece of calculated deception, specific enough to be credible, vague enough to avoid contradicting the fabricated video evidence, and devastating enough to convince any jury that Michael Thompson was guilty of grand theft. "If I don't sign this?" Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'll be forced to report your immigration violations to the appropriate authorities. Your wife Maria's job at the hotel will be in jeopardy. Your son Carlos won't be able to finish high school. Your daughter Isabella's dreams of attending nursing school will evaporate, along with your family's future in this country." The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Rodriguez picked up the pen with fingers that shook like autumn leaves, his signature appearing on the document in handwriting that looked like it belonged to a man signing his own death warrant. Meanwhile, in a windowless office across town, Whitmore's private investigator was completing the final phase of the evidence fabrication. Harold Meckler was a former police detective whose career had ended in scandal, but whose skills in creating convincing false narratives remained intact. His current assignment involved infiltrating the warehouse where Thompson worked his morning shift and planting evidence that would tie the janitor to the alleged theft. The evidence was elegant in its simplicity, betting slips from illegal gambling operations showing losses that escalated dramatically in the weeks leading up to the theft. Bank withdrawal receipts indicating large cash transactions that suggested desperate attempts to cover mounting debts. A business card for a loan shark operation, worn and creased as if it had been handled repeatedly by a man considering dangerous options. Meckler's approach to Thompson's locker was clinical and professional. He had studied the warehouse's security protocols, identified the brief window when the locker area would be unmonitored, and prepared his tools with the precision of a surgeon. The lock yielded to his picks in less than 30 seconds, and the planted evidence was distributed throughout Thompson's personal belongings with careful randomness that would appear authentic to investigators. As Meckler completed his work and melted back into the warehouse's early morning shadows, Whitmore was putting the finishing touches on the financial records that would complete Thompson's fictional transformation from honest janitor to desperate criminal. Credit reports showing mounting debt, loan applications that had been denied, and bank statements reflecting the financial desperation that would provide motive for the theft. Each document was a small work of art, crafted with attention to detail that would fool forensic accountants and convince juries. The narrative they told was both compelling and tragic. A good man pushed beyond his limits by circumstances beyond his control, making one terrible decision that would destroy everything he had worked to build. By sunrise, Harrison Whitmore had constructed a web of fabricated evidence so comprehensive and convincing that even he almost believed in Michael Thompson's guilt. The security footage, witness statements, planted evidence, and falsified financial records formed a prosecution case that appeared absolutely airtight. But the most brilliant aspect of his deception wasn't in the technical sophistication of the fabricated evidence. It was in his understanding of human psychology and social prejudice. Michael Thompson was poor, desperate, and exactly the kind of person that middle-class jurors expected to be guilty. His protests of innocence would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a caught criminal, and his exemplary character would be reframed as the careful facade of a man planning a long-term theft. As Whitmore reviewed his handiwork one final time, he felt the satisfaction of an artist completing a masterpiece. The web of deceit was complete, and Michael Thompson was trapped at its center like a fly waiting to be devoured by a patient and merciless spider. The Cayman Islands account had been Harrison Whitmore's most closely guarded secret for 7 years. A digital vault containing the accumulated wealth of systematic corporate theft that dwarfed the $50,000 he was pinning on Michael Thompson. Account number 4471-8829-0033, held at First Caribbean International Bank under the name Harrison Properties LLC, contained over $12 million in embezzled funds, money siphoned from Whitmore Industries through a network of shell companies, falsified invoices, and accounting manipulations so sophisticated that they had gone undetected by 3 separate audit firms. The theft had begun small, almost by accident, during Whitmore's 2nd year as CEO. A routine review of vendor payments had revealed discrepancies in the company's contracted services. Pest control companies that existed only on paper, maintenance contracts for buildings the company didn't own, consulting fees paid to firms that provided no actual services. What had started as Whitmore's investigation into employee fraud had evolved into something far more lucrative: his personal blueprint for the perfect corporate theft. Whitmore's private office at 3 a.m. was illuminated only by the glow of multiple computer monitors displaying financial records that told the real story of his criminal empire. Spreadsheets tracked the flow of money through a maze of offshore accounts, each transaction carefully designed to avoid triggering the automatic reporting systems that monitored large financial transfers. The sophisticated money laundering operation jobs to earn barely enough money to survive. Harrison Whitmore had been stealing more in a single month than the janitor would earn in a lifetime. The $50,000 that would destroy Thompson's life represented less than 0.5% of Whitmore's total theft, pocket change, in a criminal enterprise that had been generating millions in illegal profits for years. But the house of cards was beginning to collapse. Whitmore's gambling addiction had escalated from weekend trips to Atlantic City into a daily compulsion that consumed increasingly larger amounts of stolen money. The private poker games in Manhattan penthouses, the high-stakes blackjack tables in Monaco, the sports betting that had started as entertainment and evolved into a desperate attempt to recover losses that kept mounting with mathematical inevitability. The real crisis had begun 6 months earlier, when Vincent, the accountant, Torino, had knocked on Whitmore's door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a business proposition that wasn't really a proposition at all. Torino represented certain interests in Brooklyn who had extended Whitmore considerable credit for his gambling activities, credit that now totaled $8 million and was accumulating interest at rates that would make payday loan companies blush. "Mr. Whitmore," Torino had said, settling into the same leather chair where Rodriguez would later sign his false witness statement, "my employers are concerned about your payment schedule. $8 million represents a significant investment in your future success, and they're eager to see returns on that investment." The conversation had been polite, civilized, and absolutely terrifying. Torino spoke in euphemisms and metaphors, but his message was clear: pay the debt or face consequences that would extend far beyond financial ruin. Men like Torino's employers didn't simply write off bad debts. They collected them through methods that often made the evening news. Whitmore had promised full payment within 90 days, a timeline that had seemed achievable when he made it, but now appeared impossible with only 3 weeks remaining. The offshore accounts contained enough money to satisfy the debt, but accessing those funds would require explanations that would trigger investigations he couldn't afford. The perfect crime was becoming the perfect trap, and Michael Thompson was his only way out. The beauty of framing Thompson wasn't just in deflecting attention from his own crimes. It was in providing the chaos and confusion necessary to complete the largest theft in his company's history. While investigators focused on the janitor's supposed $50,000 theft, Whitmore would execute a final massive transfer that would drain the company's emergency reserve funds and disappear into the same offshore network that had hidden his previous thefts. The emergency reserves represented money that had been set aside for catastrophic business interruptions, natural disasters, major lawsuits, economic downturns that might threaten the company's survival. $18 million sat in accounts that were rarely monitored and never audited, protected by corporate bylaws that gave the CEO broad discretionary authority over their use during genuine emergencies. Whitmore's plan was to create his own emergency. Thompson's arrest and the resulting media attention would generate exactly the kind of corporate crisis that justified accessing emergency funds. He would claim that the theft had revealed systematic security failures, requiring immediate investment in new systems and procedures. Consultants would be hired, systems would be upgraded, and millions of dollars would flow through a network of companies that existed only to launder money back to his personal accounts. The final transfer was scheduled for the day after Thompson's trial began, when media attention would be focused on the courtroom drama and corporate investigators would be too distracted to notice unusual financial activity. $18 million would vanish in a series of transactions spread across multiple time zones, each one appearing legitimate to automated monitoring systems that weren't programmed to detect theft by the person they were supposed to protect against. But even as Whitmore refined the details of his escape plan, he couldn't shake the growing anxiety that had been gnawing at him for weeks. The Torino deadline was approaching with inexorable mathematical certainty, and each day brought new evidence that his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Phone calls from auditors asking increasingly specific questions, emails from board members requesting detailed financial reports, and worst of all, the growing suspicion in his CFO's eyes during routine meetings. Margaret Chen had been asking uncomfortable questions about expense reports and vendor payments, her forensic accounting background making her particularly sensitive to the kind of financial irregularities that Whitmore had been hiding for years. During their last meeting, she had specifically questioned a series of consulting payments to firms that she couldn't locate in any business directory. Payments that represented just a fraction of Whitmore's total theft, but could serve as the thread that unraveled everything. "Harrison," she had said, her voice carrying the kind of professional concern that preceded catastrophic revelations, "I'm having trouble verifying some of these vendor relationships. Perhaps we should bring in an external auditor to review our processes and ensure we're maintaining appropriate controls." The suggestion had been delivered with the polite restraint of a senior executive raising concerns with her CEO. But Whitmore had recognized it for what it really was: the first step in an investigation that would expose his entire criminal operation. Chen's suspicions were like cancer cells, until they reached critical mass, then spreading with devastating speed through every aspect of his financial empire. Time was running out. The Torino deadline, Chen's investigation,
and the board's increasing scrutiny were converging into a perfect storm that would destroy everything unless Whitmore could execute his escape plan flawlessly. Michael Thompson's arrest had bought him time, but not enough. He needed the chaos of a public trial, the distraction of media attention, and the corporate crisis that would justify accessing the emergency funds that represented his only path to survival. As dawn approached and Whitmore finally closed his laptop, he reflected on the delicious irony of his situation. He had spent years perfecting the art of corporate theft, building a criminal empire that had made him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. But it was the small, desperate act of framing an innocent janitor that would either complete his transformation into the perfect criminal or expose him as just another greedy executive who had finally outsmarted himself. In 18 days, Michael Thompson would go on trial for a crime he didn't commit, while the real criminal sat in the courtroom gallery, wearing a $1,000 suit and planning the final act of a theft that would make history. The web of deceit was nearly complete, and Harrison Whitmore was either the spider or the fly. He would find out which when the last thread was woven into place. The restaurant occupied a basement level beneath a forgettable Italian eatery in Little Italy, its existence known only to those who understood that real power in the city was often exercised in shadows rather than boardrooms. Whitmore descended a narrow staircase that smelled of garlic and corruption, his footsteps echoing off brick walls that had witnessed decades of conversations that never officially occurred. The private dining room was lit by candles that cast dancing shadows across the faces of 3 men who collectively controlled more of the city's legal apparatus than most citizens would ever imagine. District Attorney Raymond Walsh sat at the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, his expression carrying the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned to disguise ambition as public service. To his left sat Judge Harold Morrison, whose reputation for harsh sentencing had made him the prosecution's favorite jurist for high-profile cases. Completing the triangle of purchased justice was jury consultant Marcus Fleming, a former prosecutor whose current career involved the careful selection of jurors predisposed to convict defendants who fit certain demographic profiles. Whitmore had arranged this meeting through intermediaries who specialized in connecting wealthy individuals with public in briefcases full of cash and Swiss bank account transfers that would never appear in campaign finance reports. "Gentlemen," Whitmore began, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man accustomed to buying whatever he needed, "I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedules to discuss the Thompson case." Walsh smiled with the practiced warmth of a politician addressing potential donors. "Harrison, we're all concerned about justice being served. The theft of $50,000 from a respected business leader like yourself represents exactly the kind of crime that demands swift and decisive prosecution." The choreography of corruption was beautiful in its subtlety. No one would explicitly discuss bribes or predetermined outcomes. Instead, they would speak in euphemisms and implications, constructing a web of mutual understanding that would ensure Michael Thompson's conviction while maintaining the fiction that justice was blind. "The defendant will be represented by Public Defender Sarah Martinez," Walsh continued, consulting notes that contained far more information about the case than should have been available before formal charges were filed. "She's competent but overworked, handling approximately 40 cases simultaneously,
I'm confident she won't have the resources to mount an effective defense against the evidence we've assembled." Whitmore nodded approvingly. The selection of Thompson's attorney had been carefully orchestrated through political pressure and administrative manipulation. Martinez was honest and dedicated, but those virtues would work against her client when she was forced to prepare for trial with inadequate time and resources. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his voice carrying the measured authority of someone accustomed to determining other people's fates. "I've reviewed the preliminary evidence, and the case appears quite straightforward. Security footage, witness testimony, financial records indicating motive. The prosecution should have no difficulty establishing guilt beyond reasonable doubt." The judge's confidence was remarkable, considering that no formal evidence had been presented to his court. But Whitmore recognized it as proof that his investment in Morrison's judicial campaigns had yielded the desired returns. The judge's previous rulings had consistently favored prosecution arguments and harsh sentences, particularly in cases involving defendants from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Fleming, the jury consultant, opened a leather portfolio containing psychological profiles and demographic analyses that would have impressed academic researchers with their thoroughness. "I've prepared a detailed jury selection strategy designed to identify candidates most likely to convict. We'll focus on middle-class professionals who view theft as a fundamental violation of social order. Suburban homeowners, small business operators, individuals whose life experiences have taught them poverty with moral failure." The clinical precision with which Fleming discussed manipulating the jury selection process was chilling in its matter-of-fact tone. He spoke of constitutional rights and impartial justice as obstacles to be overcome, rather than principles to be protected. "Single parents will be eliminated during voir dire," Fleming continued, consulting his notes with professional detachment. "Anyone who has experienced financial hardship or unemployment will be dismissed as potentially sympathetic to the defendant's circumstances. We want jurors who see Thompson as fundamentally different from themselves, someone whose desperation justifies their lack of empathy." Whitmore listened with satisfaction as the three men outlined their strategy for ensuring Thompson's conviction. The beauty of their approach lay not in its corruption, though it was thoroughly corrupt, but in its exploitation of systemic biases that already existed within the justice system. They weren't subverting justice so much as amplifying its existing prejudices against defendants like Michael Thompson. The conversation turned to media management, an aspect of the case that Whitmore considered crucial to his long-term success. Public opinion would need to be shaped carefully to ensure that Thompson's eventual conviction was seen as the inevitable result of overwhelming evidence, rather than the orchestrated destruction of an innocent man. "Channel 7 has already committed to extensive coverage," Walsh noted, referring to a news director whose political aspirations required maintaining favorable relationships with the district attorney's office. "The narrative will focus on the betrayal of trust theme. A hard-working businessman extended compassion to a desperate employee, only to have that generosity thrown back in his face. The media strategy was designed to reinforce class stereotypes and social prejudices that would make Thompson's guilt seem obvious to potential jurors. Coverage would emphasize his poverty, his multiple jobs, and his daughter's medical expenses, not as mitigating factors that explained his desperation, but as evidence of the kind of circumstances that drove men to crime. Morrison raised his wine glass in a gesture that seemed casual but carried the weight of a judicial seal of approval. "To justice for the deserving," he said, his words echoing with dark irony in the candlelit room. The toast was enthusiastically received by all three men, each of whom understood that the deserving referred not to Michael Thompson, but to themselves, individuals whose wealth and position entitled them to manipulate the legal system for their personal benefit. They drank expensive wine while planning the destruction of a man whose only crime was being poor enough to serve as a convenient scapegoat. As the marketing campaign, evidence presentation would be streamlined to minimize opportunities for effective cross-examination. Witness testimony would be carefully orchestrated to build an overwhelming narrative of guilt. Sentencing recommendations would emphasize the need for deterrence and the seriousness of crimes that violated employer trust. Fleming produced a series of photographs showing potential jurors, each image accompanied by detailed psychological profiles and voting records that revealed their likely attitudes toward defendants like Thompson. The jury selection process, supposedly random and impartial, had been reduced to a strategic game designed to eliminate anyone who might question the prosecution's narrative or sympathize with the defendant's circumstances. The key, Fleming explained, is identifying jurors who view poverty as a personal failing rather than a systematic problem. "We want people who believe that honest work always leads to financial security, because they'll see Thompson's struggles as evidence of moral deficiency rather than economic injustice." The clinical precision with which they discussed manipulating constitutional protections was breathtaking in its cynicism. These men had sworn oaths to uphold justice and protect the rights of all citizens, but they spoke of those principles as inconvenient obstacles to be circumvented rather than sacred trusts to be honored. By midnight, the details of Michael Thompson's conviction had been planned with greater care and attention than most legitimate business ventures received. Every aspect of the prosecution had been orchestrated to ensure a predetermined outcome, from jury selection to media coverage to the judge's eventual sentencing decision. As Whitmore prepared to leave, Walsh handed him a business card for a private investigator who specialized in background research on potential witnesses. "Just in case the defense attempts to present character witnesses for Thompson," Walsh explained with a knowing smile. "It's always useful to have comprehensive information about anyone who might testify on behalf of the defendant." The implication was clear. Any attempt to defend Michael Thompson would be met with investigations designed to discredit his supporters and intimidate potential witnesses. The corruption extended beyond the courtroom to encompass anyone who might dare to challenge the official narrative of Thompson's guilt. Walking back to his car through the empty streets of Little Italy, Whitmore reflected on the evening's work with deep satisfaction. He had purchased not just a conviction, but an entire system of justice that would protect him while destroying an innocent man. The beauty of the arrangement was that everyone involved would profit, financially, politically, and professionally, from Michael Thompson's destruction. Facing a prosecutor with unlimited resources, judged by a man who had already decided his fate over expensive wine in a basement restaurant, the fix was in, the web was complete, and Harrison Whitmore had successfully purchased the one thing that money supposedly couldn't buy: justice itself. The only variable he hadn't accounted for was the possibility that truth might have allies he hadn't identified, and that sometimes The most unlikely heroes emerged from the most unexpected places. But those were risks he was prepared to accept, because, in his experience, money and power always triumphed over integrity and innocence. After all, that was the American way. The hallways of Jefferson Elementary had never felt so long or so hostile. On Tuesday morning, 8-year-old Emma Thompson returned to 3rd grade after her father's arrest, each step dragging under the weight of whispers. Her backpack, once filled with crayons and storybooks, now felt stuffed with shame. Children always noticed. By the time she passed Tommy Martinez's Pokemon circle, chatter died. Jessica Kim's whisper was a knife. That's the girl whose dad is a thief. Emma had heard those words on the news the night before, alongside her father's photo and the unfamiliar word embezzlement. Aunt Sarah had switched the channel too late. At the classroom door, Mrs. Patterson's bright smile couldn't hide her worry. Emma nodded, slid into her seat, and stared at her worksheets as numbers blurred into ink puddles. The morning dragged, whispers pressing in like walls. My mom says he stole $50,000. That's enough to buy a car. People like that always go to jail. Mrs. Patterson urged kindness, but her intervention only confirmed Emma's status as an outsider. Lunch was worse. She sat alone, stomach too tight to touch her peanut butter sandwich, as the cafeteria's normal buzz mocked her. Then came the intercom call. Emma Thompson to the office. In the counselor's room, Aunt Sarah's voice crackled through the phone. "Baby girl, would you like to visit your daddy? He's staying somewhere. It might be scary. Can we go today?" "This weekend." "But Emma, your daddy's in jail. It doesn't mean he's guilty, but until things get figured out, that's where he has to stay." Emma's mind snagged on the only thing that mattered. She could see him again. The Riverside County Jail Visitors Center was nothing like she'd imagined. Ugly green walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, and the heavy smell of disinfectant. Plastic chairs faced glass partitions, and everyone looked like they'd left hope outside. Emma clutched her worn teddy, Mr. Buttons, as guards searched. The warm brown eyes still found hers. "Hi, baby girl," Michael said, voice rough through the static. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" He tried to smile. "I don't know, sweetheart. The grown-ups are figuring things out. But you didn't do anything bad. Why are you here?" "Sometimes people make mistakes about who did what. It takes time to fix." Emma's brow furrowed. "Like when Tommy blamed me for breaking the fish tank, but it was really Derek?" Michael chuckled softly. "Exactly. Just bigger." "Then let me tell them you didn't do it. I can help." His throat tightened. "You're the most important person in my world. I need you to be brave, do well in school, and remember I love you more than all the stars in the sky. And I love you more than all the fish in the ocean." When a guard signaled time was nearly up, Emma leaned forward, determination in her small voice. "I'm going to help you. I'll learn about courts and judges, and I'll make them see the truth." Michael's pride and fear twisted together. As Aunt Sarah led her away, he saw that nothing, no glass wall, no prison, could dim her resolve. That night, nightmares returned. In one, Emma ran toward her father in an endless courtroom, but the judge's gavel made him fade until he was gone. She woke up sweaty and gasping. Aunt Sarah soothed her, but Emma's question cut deep. What if they keep him forever? "You let the good people help him," Sarah said. What if they don't understand him like I do? The next morning, Emma skipped recess for the library. I need books about courts and lawyers, she told Mrs. Chen. These might be hard for you, the librarian warned. I'll figure it out. That afternoon, Emma's desk at Aunt Sarah's apartment filled with notebook pages. Burden of proof, reasonable doubt, presumption of innocence. She drew scales of justice, courthouse columns, stick-figured judges and juries. At the bathroom mirror, she practiced speeches. My daddy is not a thief. He works 3 jobs, still helps me with homework, and loves me more than anything. People like that don't steal. The nightmares changed. Now she dreamed of standing in court, speaking until the judge set her father free. One evening she asked Sarah, "Do children ever get to talk to judges?" "Sometimes, but that's not your job." "It is if Daddy needs me." Later, Emma added a new drawing, a small figure at a podium, her father smiling nearby. It was more than a picture. It was a promise. Emma Thompson was getting ready to save her father, and nothing, not even the grown-up world, would stop her from rich black and tan, his eyes sharp and unblinking. At 4 years old, Rex was in his prime, experienced yet bursting with energy. Detective Maria Santos watched from the observation area as Rex swept a mock crime scene designed to challenge even the best dogs. Most would approach methodically. Rex worked with artistry, every step efficient, his nose reading the air like a book. In just over 6 minutes, he found all 4 hidden evidence pieces without a single false alert. A new facility record. Santos had been paired with Rex 18 months earlier, after her old partner, Bruno the Labrador, retired. If Bruno had been a steady sedan, Rex was a high-performance sports car. He could detect microscopic fibers, chemical residues, trace scents of fear, even the telltale signs of tampered crime scenes. She'd learned to read his subtle body language shifts, ears angling forward, tail set just so, that meant he'd noticed something humans had missed. Their most famous case had overturned an accidental warehouse fire ruling, exposing insurance fraud no one else had suspected. Rex wasn't just skilled, he seemed to understand the greater purpose of his work. That morning, neither of them knew they were heading into their most dangerous case yet. A supposed theft at Whitmore Industries. The Whitmore Tower gleamed 42 stories high. In the underground garage, Rex's ears perked as Santos fitted his harness, shifting him into work mode. The crime scene was the 38th floor, where $50,000 had allegedly been stolen from CEO Harrison Whitmore's safe by night janitor Michael Thompson. Security footage, a guard's testimony, everything pointed to Thompson. Open and shut, most thought. But the moment Rex stepped into the executive offices, his body language changed. He was detecting scents that didn't match the story. The janitor's scent was present, but layered beneath others in a way that contradicted the video's timeline. At the safe, Rex whined, a signal that scents had been contaminated. At the window area caught on camera, he barked once, planted evidence. Piece by piece, Rex dismantled the official narrative. The scent trail indicated Thompson had never been where the theft occurred, near the service elevator. His findings matched Thompson's own account, routine cleaning, no detours. Then Rex found something else. A trail leading not to Thompson's old Civic, but toward the executive parking spaces. His tail wagged. This was big. Following that trail out into the city, Rex led Santos into an exclusive hillside neighborhood of gated mansions. His destination, an estate marked Whitmore. The moment they stopped, Rex's excitement surged. He pressed against the window, eager to follow the scent onto the property. From the curb, Santos documented everything. Security systems, layout, tire tracks. The tracks matched those from the executive garage. Rex sniffed the driveway and sat abruptly. Planted evidence, a section of paving stones, had been disturbed, barely visible to the naked eye. They needed a warrant.
but getting one against a wealthy, connected man like Whitmore would be a battle. Still, Santos trusted her partner. If Rex said Thompson was innocent, then he was. Back at headquarters, Santos knew they'd uncovered only the first layer of a sophisticated frame-up. The real work, turning scent trails into admissible proof, was just beginning. Rex settled into his seat, calm but watchful. The hero with 4 legs had found the truth. Now they had to fight to make sure justice followed.
The Riverside County Courthouse had seen thousands of trials in its 90 years, but few drew such a mixed crowd as the People versus Michael Thompson. On a crisp Monday morning, courtroom 4A brimmed with reporters, curious locals, and legal observers. The Gothic Revival architecture, with its high ceilings and dark wood paneling, seemed to press history's weight onto the small man at the defense table. Outside, news vans lined the street, eager to capture the story that had gripped the public. A desperate father, crushed by medical bills, accused of stealing $50,000 from his wealthy employer. It was a tale that struck nerves, both sympathy for his struggle and fear of what desperation could cause. Inside, the front rows were a wall of cameras, notebooks, and bloggers. Behind them sat courthouse regulars and townspeople, drawn by morbid curiosity. Presiding was Judge Harold Maximum Morrison, 68, silver-haired, with a reputation for siding with prosecutors and delivering harsh sentences. At the prosecution table, District Attorney Raymond Walsh and his polished team projected confidence, their organized files and expensive suits radiating competence. At the defense table sat overworked public defender Sarah Martinez, juggling 47 cases and given only 3 weeks to prepare. Her wrinkled suit and scattered papers reflected the uphill battle ahead. Beside her, Michael Thompson, thinner, hollow-eyed, dressed in a discount suit from his aunt, looked like a man at his own funeral. In the front row, Harrison Whitmore, the alleged victim, wore the look of a wronged but dignified businessman. But the most heartbreaking figure was Emma Thompson, Michael's 8-year-old daughter. In a neat blue dress and braided hair, she sat beside Aunt Sarah, notebook in hand, fiercely watching her father, determined to understand the words that might decide his fate. Walsh's opening statement was a masterclass in persuasion, casting Whitmore as a generous employer betrayed by the man he'd tried to help. The grainy security footage showing someone of Michael's build in the executive offices became irrefutable proof. A veteran security expert vouched for the footage's authenticity, and a forensic accountant painted Michael's finances as a ticking time bomb toward bankruptcy. Charts and graphs illustrated maxed credit cards, denied loans, and
mounting medical bills for Emma. Character witnesses extolled Whitmore's charity and second chances for employees like Michael. Security guard Vincent Rodriguez testified he'd seen Michael in unauthorized areas that night, his nervous sincerity bolstering credibility. Evidence from Michael's locker, betting slips, loan shark business cards, suggested motive rooted in gambling debts and dangerous creditors. Sarah Martinez's cross-examinations were competent but ineffective. She lacked the time, resources, and evidence to counter the prosecution's airtight narrative. Her questions about the footage's technical details and the financial analysis only reinforced the picture of a desperate man. When Michael took the stand, against Martinez's advice, his testimony unraveled under Walsh's precise questioning. His anxiety and love for Emma, meant to show humanity, were used to underscore motive. By the end, media coverage echoed the courtroom's mood. Guilt seemed inevitable. Emma, however, filled her notebook with legal phrases: reasonable doubt, burden of proof, and refused to give up. She saw the jury's hardening expressions, but remained determined to speak the truth about the man she knew better than anyone. The defense tried character witnesses, but the prosecution had preemptively discredited or scared off the strongest ones. Those who testified unintentionally reinforced the narrative of financial desperation. Even Mrs. Rodriguez, a neighbor,
while praising Michael's devotion, confirmed his constant money worries. Aunt Sarah had hired a private investigator, but he found nothing to contradict the prosecution's version. The footage was authentic, the financials accurate, the witnesses consistent. As the defense rested after just 2 days, the atmosphere was heavy with certainty. Closing arguments were set for the next morning, with predictions of a swift, guilty verdict. But in the third row, Emma sat with her notebook, holding on to one belief: that someone would hear her, that the truth about her father's innocence would not die in that courtroom. At 7:30 a.m. in Judge Morrison's chambers, defense attorney Sarah Martinez made a last-minute gamble. She asked to call 8-year-old Emma Thompson to testify in her father Michael's trial, set for closing arguments at 9. District Attorney Walsh protested, calling it an emotional ploy with no relevance. But Martinez argued Emma had key observations from the night of the alleged theft, details overlooked by investigators that could undercut the prosecution's timeline and speak to her father's character. Judge Morrison weighed precedent against circumstance. Emma had been evaluated by Dr. Patricia Hendricks, who deemed her mature enough to testify truthfully. Victim advocate Susan Chen confirmed Emma could handle court stress with a comfort object and limited cross-examination. Michael, torn between protecting Emma and clearing his name,
Judge, if her testimony might convince someone to look more carefully at the evidence, Morrison allowed it. 30 minutes max for cross, with strict safeguards. Emma, clutching her teddy bear Mr. Buttons, entered the packed courtroom in a blue dress, braid neat, her small frame magnified by the silence. She promised to tell the truth, even when it's hard. Under Martinez's gentle questioning, Emma recalled the early morning arrest, her father's fear, confusion, and repeated pleas that there was some mistake. She insisted he hadn't expected the police. If he had stolen money, wouldn't he have known that they were coming? She also described a big shiny black car with dark windows that kept appearing outside their apartment before the arrest, seen 3 times, once while her dad left for work. This detail had never surfaced in reports, but matched Detective Santos's tire track evidence. Walsh's cross-examination backfired. Trying to suggest bias, he asked if she'd lie to help her father. She replied, "My daddy taught me never to lie, especially not here in court." Pressed on the car, she dismissed the idea she imagined it. "Movie cars are on TV. The real car was outside my window." Emma's candid answers drew smiles from jurors. She described Michael's exhausting 3 jobs, his sacrifices for her medical care, and his refusal to take things that don't belong to you. When Walsh hinted she couldn't know everything about him, her voice sharpened. "I know he gives me the last piece of food when we don't have enough. I know he cries when he thinks I can't see. I know he would never, ever steal money from anyone." Her sincerity cut through weeks of legal argument, raising fresh doubts. Jurors leaned forward. Even Judge Morrison seemed to reconsider the investigation's thoroughness. Juror Margaret Foster, a teacher, whispered, "She's not lying. Kids that age can't fake that under pressure." Across the room, alleged victim Harrison Whitmore paled at the mention of the black car, whispering urgently to his lawyer. His agitation seemed disproportionate to a mere theft victim. Sensing an opening, Morrison asked Martinez if she had more witnesses to expand on Emma's points. She requested a recess to consult her client. Media scrambled to rewrite their narratives. Channel 7's Jennifer Martinez reported live. What looked like an open and shut case has taken an unexpected turn. Social media exploded with sympathy under Emma Knows Best, criticizing Walsh's aggressive questioning. Michael's tears were, for once, hopeful. Emma had given jurors a reason to doubt, casting his portrayal as a calculating thief against her image of a selfless father blindsided by arrest. Her emotional peak came with a simple, ringing declaration:
"My daddy isn't a thief." It echoed with moral authority, the voice of lived truth. By lunch recess, the trial's tone shifted. Investigative gaps were now visible. The afternoon's closings would address a case transformed by a child's testimony. Judge Morrison's interest suggested the court was reconsidering whether justice was being served. Whatever came next, Emma, 8 years old, holding a worn teddy bear, had reminded everyone that sometimes the most vital truths come from the smallest voices. The morning after Emma Thompson's testimony shook the prosecution's case. Detective Maria Santos sat in Captain Rodriguez's office with Rex, the department's most celebrated German shepherd, at perfect attention by her side. She was making an unusual request: reopen the Whitmore Industries investigation. "Captain, I know how this sounds," Santos began, "but Rex's behavior at the scene told me we missed something big, evidence of deliberate deception." Rodriguez, a 25-year veteran, frowned. The Thompson trial was already in jury deliberations, the prosecution's evidence deemed overwhelming. "What do you expect to find that trained investigators didn't?" Santos slid photos and notes across the desk. They showed Rex's alerts to planted evidence, scent trails that didn't match the timeline, and reactions consistent with a frame-up, not a theft. Rodriguez knew the political cost of reopening a high-profile case. But the alternative, convicting an innocent man, was worse. After a long pause, he said, "You have 24 hours. But if your dog's wrong, the fallout will be on both of us." Back at Whitmore Industries, Rex's body vibrated with purpose. This time, Santos documented every alert. Within minutes, Rex indicated fibers deliberately placed in the carpet, foreign to the office and missed before. At camera mounts, he detected residues suggesting tampering. Most strikingly, his scent work indicated Michael Thompson had never been in the key theft areas, while someone else had lingered there extensively. The trail led Rex out of the building, through downtown, into a wealthy hillside neighborhood, straight to Harrison Whitmore's mansion. From the curb, Rex's agitation spiked. Santos recognized his sharp bark, significant evidence. Tire marks in Whitmore's driveway matched traces found at the office. Santos took her findings to Judge Patricia Williams, securing an unusual search warrant based on Rex's track record. The search was methodical. Whitmore's composure cracked instantly. "This is harassment. I'm the victim here." In his private study, Rex sat abruptly at a mahogany wall. Hidden hinges revealed a concealed, climate-controlled chamber 12 by 8 feet, lit and lined with custom storage. The room was a criminal headquarters. Along one wall, filing cabinets stuffed with bank-wrapped hundreds, millions in laundered cash. At the center, state-of-the-art video editing and security manipulation equipment, capable of fabricating footage, altering timestamps, and forging irrefutable evidence. The very kind used against Thompson. "This is how he did it," Santos murmured. Shelves held offshore banking records, shell company papers, and insurance fraud files. Even more damning, the entire blueprint for framing Michael Thompson. Fake security footage, payoffs to officials, transcripts of conversations selecting Thompson as the scapegoat. Rex kept searching, nosing out hidden compartments within the hidden room. Inside, high-end audio surveillance gear and digital files of recorded calls between corrupt prosecutors, judges, and Whitmore, casually discussing jury manipulation and predetermined verdicts. Evidence texts documented everything with meticulous care. Captain Rodriguez arrived, visibly stunned. "Rex hasn't just solved the Thompson case, he's exposed systematic corruption." The fallout was immediate. Arrest warrants were prepared for Whitmore and multiple compromised officials. The FBI stepped in for the interstate and offshore elements. Internal Affairs began probing the police department itself. Santos called Judge Morrison at the courthouse. New evidence completely exonerates Michael Thompson. The real criminal's been caught. The judge's voice mixed shock, relief, and regret. Driving away from the mansion, Santos glanced at Rex, resting in the passenger seat, tail thumping. His refusal to accept the official story had uncovered millions in theft, a network of corruption, and saved an innocent man from a decade in prison. The four-legged detective had broken the city's most sophisticated frame-up, proving once again that sometimes justice depends on trusting instinct over assumption, and the nose of a dog over the eyes of men. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4A burst open, hinges groaning like a gunshot that silenced the room. Detective Maria Santos strode in with Rex at her side, both moving with the urgency of officers who had just cracked the most important case of their careers. In her grip was a leather briefcase whose contents would upend everything in the People versus Michael Thompson. District Attorney Walsh was midway through closing arguments, painting Thompson as a desperate thief. The jury looked ready to convict. Judge Morrison bristled at the disruption, but Santos's fierce expression and Rex's alert posture signaled this was no routine interruption. "Your Honor," Santos declared, her voice cutting through the hush, "I have urgent evidence that exonerates the defendant, proof of evidence tampering, witness bribery, and a conspiracy reaching the highest levels of this case." Gasps erupted. Thompson's head snapped up, hope flickering in his eyes. 8-year-old Emma, sitting with Aunt Sarah, felt her heart. Special Agent Jennifer Crawford's voice rang out. "Harrison Whitmore, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." The handcuffs snapped shut. The man who had orchestrated the frame-up was exposed, his protests drowned by the stunned crowd. In Morrison's chambers, the air was electric. Santos opened her briefcase with care, laying out documents, photographs, and digital evidence. She described Whitmore's 7-year embezzlement scheme, $18 million siphoned through shell companies. When internal audits closed in, he chose Thompson as the perfect scapegoat, counting on juror bias against the poor. Hidden ledgers documented every step, fabricated evidence, bribed witnesses, corrupted officials. Walsh himself appeared in recordings, accepting payments to weaken Thompson's defense and press false charges. The cornerstone security footage was fabricated, Santos said, sliding over forensic reports. Timestamps altered, Thompson digitally inserted, the entire narrative built on lies. Morrison's face hardened. Expert witnesses, himself included, had been fooled. The corruption went deeper. Judges, prosecutors, bought verdicts. Vincent Rodriguez, the security guard whose testimony sealed the timeline, had been coerced with threats to his immigration status. Whitmore had studied Thompson's life for months, his financial struggles, his daughter's medical needs, building a story jurors would find believable. His selection of Thompson wasn't random, Santos explained. It was calculated to destroy an innocent man while covering Whitmore's own theft. The scope extended far beyond this case. Years of trials rigged to convict the vulnerable and protect the wealthy. Whitmore, brought in handcuffed and disheveled, tried to justify himself. The system's corrupt anyway. Thompson was going to prison someday. I just made it happen sooner. Morrison's reply was cold. You've perverted every principle of justice and nearly destroyed an innocent family. Back in court,
Morrison's voice carried the weight of authority and remorse. After reviewing the evidence presented by Detective Santos and her canine partner Rex, this court finds Michael Thompson was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. All charges are dismissed with prejudice. He is free to go. Thompson collapsed in tears. Emma leapt from her seat, calling "Daddy," and throwing herself into his arms. They clung to each other as Aunt Sarah wept, months of fear dissolving in relief. The media frenzy exploded. Outside Whitmore's perp walk, silver hair mussed, suit wrinkled, hands cuffed, became the defining image of justice. The explosion that followed Morrison's announcement was unlike anything the courthouse had ever witnessed. Michael Thompson, who had spent months believing that his life was effectively over, broke down in tears of relief and disbelief that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his soul could contain. The man who had worked 3 jobs to support his daughter, who had faced the prospect of 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, was finally free to return to the life that Harrison Whitmore's conspiracy had tried to destroy. Emma Thompson's reaction was pure 8-year-old joy mixed with confusion about the complex legal proceedings she had been trying to understand for weeks. She launched herself from the gallery seating toward her father with a kind of uninhibited emotion that only children could express, her small voice calling, "Daddy, Daddy," as she ran toward the man who had been taken from her by forces she couldn't comprehend but had never stopped fighting against. The reunion between Michael and Emma in the courtroom was witnessed by hundreds of people whose own faith in justice had been shaken by the revelations of the past hour. Father and daughter embraced with the desperate intensity of people who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control and were now being reunited through the intervention of truth and the extraordinary detective work of an unlikely hero with 4 legs and an unshakable commitment to following evidence wherever it might lead. Aunt Sarah wept openly as she watched Michael and Emma's reunion, her tears representing months of worry, prayer, and desperate hope that somehow her brother's innocence would be vindicated before it was too late. The woman who had taken care of Emma during Michael's incarceration, who had used her modest savings to support legal efforts that seemed hopeless, was finally witnessing the miracle she had been praying for since the morning when police had dragged her brother away in handcuffs. The media frenzy that erupted both inside and outside the courthouse was unprecedented in its scope and intensity. News crews that had been covering what they expected to be a routine conviction found themselves documenting one of the most dramatic reversals in legal history. The story was no longer about a desperate father driven to crime, but about systematic corruption, police heroism, and the near destruction of an innocent family through elaborate criminal conspiracy. Harrison Whitmore's perp walk from the courthouse to the waiting FBI transport vehicle was broadcast live on every local news station and shared millions of times on social media within hours. The image of the wealthy businessman in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled, and his silver hair disheveled, served as a powerful symbol of justice finally being served after months of systematic corruption. The man who had orchestrated one of the most sophisticated frame-ups in the city's history was now the criminal justice system he had corrupted. But this time without the protection of wealth and influence. Rex's recognition as the hero who had solved the case was both immediate and overwhelming. The German shepherd who had refused to accept the official narrative, whose superior senses had detected evidence that human investigators had missed completely, was hailed by media and law enforcement professionals as an example of how dedication to truth could overcome even the most sophisticated deception. His photograph appeared on front pages across the country, accompanied by headlines celebrating the dog who saved an innocent man, Judge Morrison's public apology to Michael Thompson, and his promise of a comprehensive investigation into the corruption that had been exposed, was delivered with the gravity of someone whose faith in the system he had served for 15 years had been profoundly shaken. Morrison understood that his courtroom had been used as a venue for systematic perversion of justice, and his commitment to ensuring that such corruption could never happen again was both professional and deeply personal. "Mr. Thompson," Morrison addressed Michael directly, his voice carrying genuine remorse and official authority. "On behalf of this court and the justice system that failed you so completely, I offer my sincere apology. You and your daughter have suffered tremendously due to corruption that should never have been allowed to flourish within our legal institutions." The immediate aftermath of Thompson's exoneration included the announcement of federal investigations into every case that had been prosecuted by District Attorney Walsh, every trial that had been presided over by corrupt judges, and every conviction that might have been tainted by the systematic corruption that Whitmore's conspiracy had revealed. The implications were staggering. Dozens of convictions might need to be reviewed. Appeals would be filed in cases going back years, and the public's faith in the justice system would require extensive rebuilding. Detective Santos and Rex received commendations from the police department, recognition from federal law enforcement agencies, and gratitude from civil rights organizations, who understood that their investigation had exposed corruption that threatened the foundations of equal justice under law. Santos's trust in her partner's extraordinary abilities had not only saved an innocent man, but had revealed systematic problems that demanded immediate attention and comprehensive reform. The beginning of Harrison Whitmore's criminal trial was announced for 6 months later, with federal prosecutors promising that his prosecution would be thorough, transparent, and designed to ensure that his crimes against Michael Thompson and the justice system itself would be punished to the full extent of the law. The charges against Whitmore included result in decades in federal prison. As Michael Thompson walked out of the courthouse as a free man, carrying his daughter in his arms, while surrounded by reporters and well-wishers, the image served as a powerful reminder that justice delayed was not necessarily justice denied. The system had failed him catastrophically, but it had also ultimately vindicated him through the extraordinary efforts of people who refused to accept easy answers when truth demanded deeper investigation. Rex walked beside Detective Santos with the dignified bearing of a professional who understood that his work had served something larger than individual cases or personal recognition. The German Shepherd had reminded everyone involved that the pursuit of justice sometimes required looking beyond human assumptions and institutional prejudices to follow evidence wherever it might lead, regardless of how uncomfortable or politically inconvenient the truth might prove to be. Justice had finally been served. But the work of rebuilding trust in the system and ensuring that such corruption could never flourish again was just beginning. The truth had been revealed, the innocent had been vindicated, and the guilty were facing the consequences of their crimes. But the real victory was in proving that sometimes the most unlikely heroes were exactly what justice needed to prevail over corruption and deception. The morning after Michael Thompson's exoneration broke across the nation's consciousness like a sunrise after the longest night, illuminating corners of the American justice system
that most citizens preferred not to examine too closely. Headlines from coast to coast proclaimed variations of the same shocking story. Innocent man nearly convicted in elaborate frame-up, and Dog Hero exposes massive corruption conspiracy, and 8-year-old's testimony helps save father from prison. The case that had begun as a local news story about employee theft had evolved into a national conversation about wealth, poverty, corruption, and the fundamental question of whether justice was truly blind or merely blindfolded by prejudice and influence. CNN's morning coverage featured legal experts who struggled to find precedents for the scope of corruption that Rex's investigation had revealed, while discussing the implications for dozens of other cases that might have been tainted by similar, systematic deception. The network's legal analyst, a former prosecutor with 20 years of experience, described the Thompson case as a wake-up call for everyone who believes in equal justice under law, noting that Whitmore's conspiracy had succeeded for months precisely because it had exploited societal assumptions about poverty, desperation, and the likelihood of criminal behavior among the economically disadvantaged. The public reaction to Michael's story was swift, had suffered, and demands for systematic reform to prevent similar frame-ups in the future. The hashtag Justice for Michael became a rallying cry for criminal justice reform advocates, while Emma Knows Best celebrated the 8-year-old girl whose courage and determination had played a crucial role in exposing the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her family. Within 48 hours of Michael's exoneration, a legal defense fund established by civil rights organizations had raised over $200,000 to support wrongfully accused defendants who lacked the resources to mount adequate defenses against systematic prosecution. The fund, officially named the Michael Thompson Justice Foundation, was designed to provide investigative resources, expert witnesses, and legal support for defendants whose circumstances made them vulnerable to the kind of frame-up that had nearly sent an innocent man to prison for a decade. Michael's lawsuit against Harrison Whitmore and Whitmore Industries was filed within a week of his exoneration, seeking damages not only for the months of imprisonment and emotional trauma he had endured, but also for the systematic violation of his civil rights through a conspiracy that had perverted every aspect of the legal process. The lawsuit detailed how Whitmore's wealth and influence had been used to purchase a conviction through fabricated evidence, witness intimidation, and judicial corruption, creating a legal precedent that would make similar conspiracies more difficult to execute and more costly to attempt. The legal team representing Michael in his civil lawsuit included some of the nation's most prominent civil rights attorneys, who had taken the case without fee because of its implications for the broader struggle against systematic injustice. Lead attorney Sarah Chen, a partner at one of the country's most prestigious civil rights law firms, described the case as a textbook example of how wealth and privilege can be weaponized against the most vulnerable members of our society, and why we must remain vigilant against those who would purchase justice like any other commodity. Emma Thompson's pride in having helped save her father was evident in every interview she gave to child-friendly media outlets, her 8-year-old vocabulary expanding to include terms like constitutional rights and due process, as she discussed her experience with the kind of clarity that amazed adult observers. When asked by a children's television host how she had found the courage to testify in court, Emma's response was characteristically direct. "My daddy needed help, and I knew he was good, so I had to tell everyone the truth about him." That's what you do when you love someone. You don't let bad people hurt them if you can stop it. The family's first dinner together in their own home after Michael's release was a quiet celebration that represented something far more significant than a meal. It was the restoration of a family unit that systematic corruption had tried to destroy. The small apartment that had seemed so cramped and inadequate during their struggles with medical bills and multiple jobs now felt like a palace because they were together again. because the shadow of prison no longer hung over their future, and because the truth had finally triumphed over lies and deception. Michael cooked Emma's favorite meal, spaghetti with meatballs and garlic bread, using ingredients they could finally afford without counting every penny or worrying about choosing between food and medicine. As they sat at their small kitchen table, Emma chattering about her day at school, where she had become something of a celebrity among her classmates, Michael felt a peace he had forgotten was possible during the months when every day had brought him closer to a conviction that would have separated them forever. "Daddy," Emma said between bites of spaghetti, her voice carrying the serious tone she used when discussing important matters, "I'm glad I helped save you, but I'm even more glad that you're home and we can eat dinner together again." Michael's response was immediate and heartfelt. "Emma, you saved more than just me. You showed everyone that truth and love are stronger than lies and money. You reminded grown-ups that sometimes the most important truths come from people they might not expect to listen to." The vindication that Michael Thompson had received was more than legal exoneration. It was a public acknowledgement that an innocent man and his daughter had been subjected to systematic injustice, and that their suffering had exposed corruption that threatened the foundations of equal justice under law. Their story had become a symbol of hope for other families facing similar challenges, proof that even the most sophisticated conspiracies could be defeated by courage, determination, and the refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. As father and daughter cleaned up after dinner, working together in the easy companionship they had both missed desperately during their forced separation, they represented something larger than their individual triumph. They were living proof that the American dream of justice and opportunity was still possible, even for those who lacked wealth and influence, as long as there were people willing to fight for truth and heroes willing to follow evidence wherever it might lead. The recognition ceremony at the Children's Advocacy Center was unlike anything the organization had ever hosted, drawing media attention from across the country and creating a platform for discussing how young people could contribute to social justice, even when adults seemed to have given up hope. Emma Thompson, dressed in her best blue dress with her hair carefully braided by Aunt Sarah, sat on a stage beside prominent child advocates, legal experts, and the mayor, her 8-year-old presence somehow commanding more attention with decades of professional experience in fighting for children's rights. The National Association of Child Advocates had created a special bravery award specifically for Emma, recognizing not just her courage in testifying at her father's trial, but her months of preparation, her determination to understand complex legal concepts, and most importantly, her refusal to accept adult assumptions about what children could or couldn't contribute to the pursuit of justice. The award citation read, "For extraordinary courage in speaking truth to power, for demonstrating that age is no barrier to moral authority, and for reminding us all that sometimes the most important voices are the ones we might not expect to hear." Emma's acceptance speech was brief but powerful, delivered in her clear, honest voice that had already moved one courtroom and was now inspiring a national audience. "I learned that when someone you love is in trouble, and you know the truth, you have to be brave enough to tell it, even if it's scary, even if grown-ups might not believe you. My daddy taught me to always tell the truth, and that's what I did. I hope other kids will remember that their voices matter too, and that sometimes we can help solve problems that grown-ups think are too hard." The recognition ceremony for Rex at police headquarters drew law enforcement officials from multiple agencies, canine trainers from around the country, and animal welfare advocates who understood that Rex's achievement represented more than exceptional police work. It demonstrated the remarkable capabilities that could emerge from the partnership between human intuition and animal instinct. Chief Patricia Williams, in her 15 years leading the department, had never presided over a ceremony that generated as much positive attention for the police as Rex's recognition for solving the Thompson case. Rex's commendation was unprecedented in its scope and significance. The German Shepherd received not only the department's Medal of Honor for exceptional service, but also recognition from the FBI for his role in exposing federal crimes, and a special citation from the International Association of Police Chiefs for demonstrating investigative techniques that would influence canine training protocols worldwide. The citation noted that Rex's work had redefined the possibilities for canine contribution to criminal investigations and established new standards for evidence detection that will benefit law enforcement agencies for generations to come. Detective Maria Santos's promotion to lieutenant was announced during the same ceremony, recognizing not only her investigative skills, but also her courage in trusting her partner's extraordinary abilities over institutional assumptions and bureaucratic pressure. Santos's willingness to pursue Rex's leads, despite skepticism from colleagues and superiors, had been vindicated in the most spectacular way possible, and her promotion came with assignment to head
a new unit dedicated to investigating potential wrongful convictions and systematic corruption. In her acceptance speech, Lieutenant Santos emphasized that her promotion was really recognition of Rex's exceptional abilities and their partnership's commitment to following evidence wherever it led. Rex taught me that good police work sometimes means questioning assumptions, challenging conventional wisdom, and trusting your instincts, even when they lead you in directions that others find uncomfortable or inconvenient. Our job is to serve truth and justice, not to confirm pre-existing beliefs or support predetermined outcomes. The national media coverage of these recognition ceremonies was extensive and overwhelmingly positive, focusing on themes of heroism, justice, and the importance of diverse perspectives in solving complex problems. Network news programs featured segments on unlikely heroes that highlighted how an 8-year-old girl and a German Shepherd had accomplished what experienced prosecutors and investigators had failed to achieve. The coverage emphasized that justice sometimes required looking beyond traditional sources of authority and expertise to find truth in unexpected places. Michael Thompson's testimony before the Congressional Subcommittee on Criminal Justice Reform was broadcast live on C-SPAN and drew millions of viewers who were hungry for authentic voices in discussions about systematic problems in the American legal system. Michael's appearance before Congress was remarkable not for its political sophistication. He remained a working-class man with limited formal education, but for its moral authority and lived experience of how corruption could destroy innocent lives. Senators, Michael addressed the subcommittee with the same honest directness that had characterized his testimony during his trial. I'm not a lawyer or a politician or an expert on criminal justice policy. I'm just a father who works hard to take care of his daughter and who was almost sent to prison for 10 years because wealthy people thought my life was expendable. If my 8-year-old daughter and a police dog hadn't been braver and smarter than the adults who were supposed to protect me, I would be in federal prison right now for crimes I didn't commit. The policy changes that emerged from congressional hearings, inspired by the Thompson case, were comprehensive and significant.
addressing systematic vulnerabilities that Whitmore's conspiracy had exploited. New requirements for evidence verification, mandatory review procedures for cases involving significant class disparities between accusers and defendants, and enhanced protections for defendants who couldn't afford adequate legal representation, were all direct responses to the injustices that Michael and Emma had endured. Perhaps most important, offices, monitoring judicial behavior for patterns that might indicate systematic bias, and providing resources for defendants whose circumstances made them vulnerable to frame-ups. These institutional changes, while long overdue, represented acknowledgement that the system's existing safeguards had failed catastrophically and needed to be strengthened to protect the most vulnerable citizens. The recognition that Emma, Rex, and their human partners received was gratifying and well-deserved. But it also served a larger purpose in demonstrating that heroism could emerge from unexpected sources, and that justice sometimes required the courage to challenge authority, question assumptions, and insist that truth was more important than convenience or conventional wisdom. Their story had become a symbol of hope for everyone who believed that right could triumph over might, that love could overcome prejudice, and that even the most sophisticated conspiracies could be defeated by courage and determination. As the recognition ceremonies concluded and the media attention began to fade, the real work of preventing similar injustices continued. The policies, procedures, and institutional changes inspired by their case would benefit thousands of future defendants who would never know that their rights were being protected by reforms that emerged from the courage of an 8-year-old girl who refused to let her father be destroyed by lies, and a German shepherd who refused to accept evidence that didn't make sense to his superior senses. The morning sun streaming through the windows of the Thompson family's new apartment painted everything in golden light that seemed to symbolize the transformation their lives had undergone in the 6 months since Michael's exoneration. The 2-bedroom unit in a safe, middle-class neighborhood was modest by most standards, but to Michael and Emma it represented something approaching luxury after years of financial struggle and months of separation. The living room was furnished with comfortable, if second-hand, furniture that Aunt Sarah had helped them select, and Emma's bedroom contained the first real bed she had ever owned, complete with a bookshelf that was rapidly filling with the advanced reading materials that reflected her accelerated intellectual development. Michael's new position as a facility supervisor at the regional medical center represented more than just employment. It was recognition of his skills, experience, and character by people who had hired him despite his highly publicized legal troubles. The hospital's administration had been moved by his story and impressed by the testimonials from his previous employers, all of whom emphasized his reliability, honesty, and dedication to doing quality work regardless of the circumstances. The job provided not only fair wages and benefits, but also the dignity that came from being valued for his contributions rather than being viewed as a desperate man willing to serve aided work for subsistence pay. Emma's health had improved dramatically since they had gained access to the medical care that their new insurance coverage made possible. The asthma attacks that had terrorized both father and daughter for years were now controlled through proper medication and regular monitoring by pediatric specialists who understood that her condition was manageable with appropriate treatment. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, her energy had returned, and most importantly, the constant fear that had shadowed her childhood had been replaced by the confident optimism of a little girl who had learned that truth and courage could overcome even the most frightening challenges. The apartment's kitchen had become the heart of their new life together, a place where Michael could prepare proper meals without counting every penny, where Emma could do homework at a table that wasn't covered with unpaid bills, and where they could have the kind of relaxed family conversations that had been impossible during their years of financial crisis and months of forced separation. Their evening routine now included Emma helping with dinner preparation while chattering about her day at the new school, where her classmates treated her like a celebrity rather than an object of pity or curiosity. Michael's involvement with the Innocence Project that had emerged from his case had given him a sense of purpose that went beyond personal recovery. His work as an advocate for wrongfully accused defendants drew on his lived experience of how the system could fail, but also on his fundamental decency and his ability to connect with people who were facing the same nightmare that had almost destroyed his own life. He testified regularly at hearings about criminal justice reform, consulted with defense attorneys about the psychological impact of false accusations, and most importantly, provided hope and encouragement to families who were struggling with circumstances similar to what he and Emma had endured. Emma's dreams of becoming a lawyer had crystallized during the months of legal proceedings, courtroom observations, and conversations with the attorneys who had helped save her father. Her 8-year-old understanding of legal concepts was remarkably sophisticated, and her motivation was deeply personal. She wanted to help other people like her daddy, who needed someone to fight for them when the system seemed determined to ignore their innocence. Her bedroom wall was decorated with photographs from the various recognition ceremonies she had attended, but also with drawings she had made of herself in a courtroom, standing at a podium and speaking for people who needed someone to tell their truth. The lawsuit against Harrison Whitmore and his company had been settled for an amount that would ensure Emma's college education and provide financial security for both of them. But more importantly, it had established legal precedents that would make similar courses in work conspiracies more difficult to execute and more costly to attempt. The settlement included provisions for ongoing monitoring of corporate security practices and employee protection policies that would benefit thousands of workers who would never know that their rights were being protected by reforms that emerged from Michael and Emma's suffering. On a warm Saturday afternoon in late spring, Detective Santos brought Rex to visit the Thompson family at their new apartment, continuing a friendship that had developed between the unlikely heroes whose combined efforts had exposed one of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies in the city's history. Emma's delight at seeing Rex was infectious, and the German shepherd's gentle playfulness with the little girl who had helped solve his most important case created moments of pure joy that reminded everyone present why their work mattered. Rex and Emma played in the apartment's small backyard, the dog's dignified professionalism giving way to the simple pleasure of interacting with a child whose courage and honesty had contributed to his greatest investigative triumph. Emma threw a tennis ball that Rex retrieved with patient indulgence, both of them representing the triumph of truth over deception, innocence over corruption, and hope over despair. Michael and Lieutenant Santos watched from the kitchen window, sharing the quiet satisfaction of people who had witnessed justice prevail despite systematic efforts to pervert it. Their conversation touched on ongoing cases, policy reforms, and the institutional changes that were still being implemented as a result of the corruption that Rex's investigation had exposed. But mostly they simply enjoyed watching the symbols of their shared victory play together in the afternoon sunshine. "You know," Santos said as she watched Rex and Emma's interaction, "I think they both understand that they accomplished something bigger than solving a single case. They proved that courage and determination can overcome even the most sophisticated deception, and that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected sources." Michael nodded, his expression reflecting the peace that came from knowing that his daughter would grow up understanding that justice was possible, that truth mattered, and that even the most powerless people could make a difference when they refused to accept injustice as inevitable. Emma learned that her voice matters, that adults don't always know everything, and that sometimes you have to fight for what's right even when it's scary. Those are lessons that will serve her well no matter what she decides to do with her life. As the afternoon faded into evening and Santos prepared to leave with Rex, Emma hugged the German Shepherd with the kind of affection reserved for true friends who had shared extraordinary experiences. Rex tolerated her attention with dignified patience, but his tail wagged with genuine pleasure at the interaction. With the brave little girl who had played such an important role in their shared triumph. The final image of that perfect afternoon was Emma and Rex sitting together on the apartment's front steps, both of them representing the victory of courage over fear, truth over lies, and hope over despair. They were living symbols of the American promise that justice was possible for everyone, regardless of their circumstances. As long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, and heroes willing to follow truth wherever it might lead. The Thompson family's new beginning was more than personal recovery. It was proof that the system could work when good people refused to accept corruption as inevitable, when truth-seekers persisted despite institutional resistance, and when courage emerged from the most unlikely sources to challenge power and demand justice. Their story would continue to inspire others facing similar challenges, reminding everyone that sometimes the most important victories were won not by the powerful or the privileged, but by ordinary people who refused to let injustice have the final word. In the end, love had triumphed over hatred, truth had overcome deception, and a father and daughter who had survived systematic injustice were building a new life based on hope, dignity, and the unshakable belief that courage and determination could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts to destroy the innocent. Their new beginning was really a continuation of the American dream, the promise that justice, opportunity, and redemption were possible for everyone willing to fight for them. Rex's extraordinary loyalty and intelligence remind us why German Shepherds have earned their place as humanity's most trusted companions. His unwavering dedication to truth, his protective instincts toward the innocent, and his profound bond with Detective Santos showcase the remarkable depth of connection possible between humans and dogs. Throughout this story, we've witnessed how a dog's love transcends words, expressed through gentle patience with Emma, fierce determination to protect Michael, and absolute loyalty to his partner Santos. Rex didn't just solve the case. He demonstrated the pure, uncomplicated devotion that makes dogs such precious parts of our families. The bond between humans and dogs runs deeper than training or commands. It's built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and that indefinable connection that transforms both lives. If you've been touched by Rex's story and find yourself wanting to strengthen that special relationship with your own German Shepherd or any beloved dog, there are gentle, respectful ways to deepen that connection, methods that honor the intelligence and sensitivity